In our modern world, what are the impacts of things like genetics versus the human reality of will? I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. Today's conversation was inspired by a book I just finished reading, The Selfish Gene by Dawkins. It's essentially about Darwinism and the idea of natural selection. Now, those two things are intricately tied together. The Darwinian theory is essentially that evolution comes about via natural selection. How that works is essentially this: certain genes do certain things to a body. It can be a human body, an animal body, a virus body, a plant body, whatever. Some of the effects of those genes are better suited for the environment. A common example is rabbits in the Arctic, where there is plenty of snow. Rabbits who have a gene for white fur will do better than rabbits for a gene who have a different color. Why? Because they can blend in with the snow. Therefore, they can hide better from predators. Therefore, they are more likely to live and have the ability to pass on their genes to future generations. The other rabbits who aren't as shielded from the predators are more likely to be eaten. Now, because of that, in the future, eventually you'll have a lot of rabbits with white fur, because those are the ones who survived and those are the ones with the genes who are able to pass them on. It will be rare to have rabbits with a different variation because it's not built for success in that particular environment. Now, the theory is called natural selection because nature is essentially what's selecting for the evolutionary traits that will be passed on. You can take this example and flip it and say if there were rabbits in the desert, the rabbit with the tan fur would likely do better and receive the benefits of natural selection, having their genes be passed on in more plentiful quantity because those individuals are better suited for the environment. They can hide better, they have a greater odd at reaching maturity and reproducing, whatnot. All of these benefits accrue to the individual organism via the relationship between their environment and the genes they have. How do those things play out? Is it a successful relationship or one that is ripe with peril? Now, the interesting thing though is humans seem to be the only species that have broken free from this chain of events. Humans are free of nature's evolutionary grip for the most part today. And even if you don't want to go as far as agreeing with me and saying for the most part, they are free from it to a degree that is far more than we've seen in the previous thousands of years, and far more than any other living organism has displayed. We, in a sense, have become nature itself. We are the engine now of natural selection. And what do I mean by that? If we take the theory back to its roots, natural selection is essentially looking for particular traits that enable an organism to do well in its environment. Well, we're not dealing with humans living in the wilderness anymore. Humans with longer legs who are more muscular, whatever you want to say, that would have benefited them before because they'd be able to hunt more effectively, get food more effectively, escape from predators at a better rate, if they're able to survive, get old, all that stuff. It's not entirely relevant anymore in today's world. If you take a human who is physically imposing and you put them in a world of many thousands of years ago, that individual will likely be one of the top tier humans in terms of success. And you can define success as the ability to reproduce and spread your genes to the future. That's kind of what natural selection goes on about. It tries to quantify that. In today's world, there is no such link between your physical prowess and the ability to succeed, quote unquote. Why is that? Well, because humans don't have any natural predators anymore. We don't have to be physically fit to evade them. We don't have to be physically fit to hunt for our food anymore. We can just walk to the grocery store. A lot of these things that natural selection selected for in the past, it no longer can do that because the environment is so vastly different, so vastly under the control of other humans. Now, I say we have become nature itself for a couple of reasons. First of all, humans dictate what success looks like in today's society. And if you want to define success as you would in the Darwinian term, in a sense of being able to propagate your line, being able to forward your genes and your genetic material into the future, how that increases your likelihood in today's world is different than how it would in the past. Today, it seems like things such as perhaps money and status and having a good job, being intelligent, being funny, being attractive physically, looking good, things like this are more relevant than they ever were before. they don't really have pure survival benefit. The ability to make money, what does that mean? It's only become relevant in the past couple hundred years. In the past, that would be something that isn't quite needed, especially in societies that didn't even develop the idea of economics and money and whatnot. It's a new phenomenon. And if you define success, as we said, in the Darwinian sense, the definitions of what can get you to that point are so vastly different. And we determined that today. Now, a very interesting paradox is supposed here. How does something like natural selection work in that current environment? Can it see these things? So in the past, if you were a fast runner, you physically had these traits that gave you an edge. Natural selection could see that because the rewards were tied to it. And therefore, you'd be likely to accrue benefits that the other humans in your area did not have. And therefore, you'd be in a better position to procreate and spread your genes to the future. Based on today's definition of success, though, how does that work out? Let's say you're extremely gifted at engineering and you have a cute face and you're kind of funny. How exactly does that pass on? Can it see that? Can natural selection see these criteria here? It will know that the genes have been passed on, but can it attribute it directly to your intelligence with computer science? And can that be shared with your offspring? Can your sense of humor be shared with the offspring? Now, of course, your cute face, that probably could. Genetics do have a role to play in your appearance, but the other things, it's not so clear. It seems like things like knowledge, first of all, cannot be passed down, at least genetically. That's more of a cultural thing, via shared stories and customs and norms and whatnot. Humor, the same thing there. Now, that leads me to my point. It seems like this new revelation comes with something that affects evolutionary success. It seems like cultural factors are more important than biological ones today. Your ability to present yourself in a way that is accepted in your current environment, your ability to succeed in it. Of course, there is a certain floor that the genes provide you with, but to actually succeed, it's more about how you develop, and that could be a blessing. It seems like everyone has a fair shot now at succeeding in some way. At least you have the ability to influence your chance. See, if everything was strictly based on genetics, like with many other animals and species, you likely couldn't do too much to change that. It's either you're born with these criteria that will help you succeed in the environment, or you're not. We can go back to the rabbit example in the Arctic. It's either you have the genes for the fur that will camouflage you, or you don't. And if you don't, there really isn't too much you can do there to better your scenario. When compared to your peers, they will have the inherent edge against you in the Darwinian sense. But today, in the human world, you can do things to close that gap because of the cultural influence there. Because of that whole new game, that whole new terrain that you can play in. It's quite interesting. There are a couple other senses where the quote, humans have become nature is also applicable. With other animals even. You can think of things that we have domesticated, like farm animals. We have become the nature that determines success for them. Many of these animals are not in the wild anymore, doing their own thing, surviving based on true natural criteria and true natural environments. They're living in particular barns and facilities where they are bred, captivated, and bred to be eaten, essentially. Now, there's still that Darwinian sense of success, being able to pass down your genes, and it's no longer about what the environment wants. And here's an example. You can think of cows for a case. In the natural environment, before they were domesticated, it would likely be beneficial for a cow to be somewhat slim, so they could move with some type of agility. If a threat presented itself, they can get away. But today, humans are selecting for cows that are fat because we want to eat them. We want the meat, and even pigs, whatever. A lot of these creatures, animals, organisms are obese now. That benefits us because there's more meat for us to consume. But if that animal had to survive on its own, it probably couldn't get that far. It can't move as fast, it can't do as much, and there are probably issues with its joints, like when a human becomes obese, that hinder it. But still, we're selecting for that. We want future offsprings of cows and sheep and pig to be fat so we get more meat, etc. That influence has led to an entire generation of cows that are fat, that provide us more meat. And of course, we've done things like inject them with hormones and whatnot, but that solidifies the point. Humans are the new environment, not just for us, but for other creatures too. It isn't even in the consumption realm. You can think of things like pets and dogs. Dogs are a descendant of wolf, but they've been domesticated. They've been made friendly and small and petite. We have selected for that. If these small dogs were selected by for nature, it'd be almost incomprehensible to see how that made sense, because their survival odds, the natural selection, wouldn't favor a really small dog that can't hunt. Its natural defense mechanism is to bark. It's extremely friendly to these foreign creatures called humans. It's just not something that nature would select for. Nature, left alone, will be producing things like the wolf, the coyote, individual organisms that have not been domesticated, because they're better suited to survive in the natural environment. Humans have created things like the modern day dog, and it is quite astounding. All of this is to say that essentially many features of traditional evolution and Darwinian thinking and natural selection no longer fully apply to humans in terms of defining success. And of course, you have that other argument, defining success. And as I've said thus far, we've defined it in the Darwinian sense because that's what the conversation is about. Of course, you can be successful as an individual by doing whatever you want. You can be successful by not having children, by watching Netflix all day, doing these things here, but that doesn't make sense in terms of our conversation. We're talking about natural selection and genes, and fundamentally, success is defined in this way, biologically, by being able to propagate. Now, to me, this is interesting because this freedom from nature, the ability to define success as something different, the ability to create environments where Darwinian aspects are no longer the primary way of succeeding, this brings about the inception of morality in my eyes. The ability to act based on your own thoughts, that comes with great power and also responsibility. Now, here are some examples that I think people get wrong. Some people will say that the human is unique because it can do things like torture other individuals for its own sake and whatnot. That's not entirely true. That wouldn't be where morality stems from. It's not even a good argument. There are species of insects who will do things like paralyze other creatures, drag them to the den, lay their eggs in the body, and while that victim is alive, the eggs are eating it alive. That's torture. Humans are not the only species to develop that. You can say it's cruel, you can say it's heinous, but it is nature. Now, where the real difference is, and this is where humans have the unique aspect, is intent. The individual insect who is paralyzing the carcass and bringing it back alive to its den, to be eaten alive by its children, is doing it based on instinct. Based on the ways its genes have programmed it into defining success. This is what it needs to do to propagate its line, to ensure its children have a food source and they can grow up and do the same thing. Humans, though, we don't have that same type of rationale. We have the ability to decide why we're going to do things. It's not purely based on genetics, and that's the main difference between humans and other animals, all other animals actually. If a human decides to torture someone, they're not doing it to further their line directly, at least in the Darwinian sense. They're doing it for ulterior motives, either to extract information from them, in the sense of a government torturing a convict, to get pleasure from them, in the sense of a psychopath torturing someone else. And that's where morality comes in. You aren't entirely the victim of impulses. You have this higher thinking, this ability to decide for yourself and define what your intention is. We cannot even layer on this idea of intention to other species because it's all the same. The intention of the spider who has paralyzed this individual creature to be fed alive to its children, the intention of the lion who is killing the gazelle to eat, the intention of the turtle who is eating that sardine, it's all to survive. It's all baked into their DNA, their genetic code. That is simply how they exist. They're not thinking about the ethical implications of that. Otherwise, they probably go extinct. They would die because that is their way of life. Humans are vastly different, though. We have that extra element. Philosophically, there is this presence of determinism which comes from our genes, and free will, which comes from the mind, and that rules our world. There are many people who are on one pole or the other. They will say there's pure free will, there's pure determinism, but I don't think that's true. It's actually a mix of the two, and if you don't know definitions here, determinism is an idea that things are predetermined, that there is a cause and effect, and you are simply the effect of the cause, that you don't have much control here. You are a ball rolling. And the free will side of things, they say that, well, nothing is predetermined. You can do anything. There are no limits here. They're both flawed in their thinking because we have aspects of each philosophy, really. Like with many things, it's a gray area. There's a middle ground. So determinism does in fact come from, actually here, I'll begin by giving the analogy. This will help set the stage for the explanation. Life is almost like a game of chess. Your genes are going to determine how you can operate. It determines the rules of the game. You can have a king, it can move forward, backward, side to side. It cannot go off the board. If it dies, then the game is over. Those are predetermined. You can think of that as similar to the genetics of a human. We can walk, we can do this, we can do that, but we can't do this and this and that. There are things we can and cannot do that's predetermined. We have impulses, we desire certain things, those are baked in. But there is the free will there in terms of deciding what to do. The king can go forward, backwards, left to right. Now you choose what you want to do within that parameter. For animals, the equation will be slightly different. They could just move forward, basically. Like if they were the king piece, they could only go forward and they would have to do that every day. Humans, we can go forward, we can go back, we can go left to right. That is your free will. That is your ability to decide and influence what goes on. So the game board is set up. But within the game, there are infinite possibilities. Like the amount of chess games that can play out is what, in the millions or the billions? Because there is an infinite variation of things you can do in a game. Not infinite, but near infinite. For all intents and purposes, it is infinite actually to us because we could not do all of that in one lifetime. So much possibility, but of course there is a barrier there. If there was no barrier there, if you could do anything you wanted, there was no restrictions, plus you had free will, you would essentially be a god. That is close to a definition of that, of a divine being. We are not that. We do have the limitations, but that's a good thing, because it defines the rules for us and it gives us the ability to play a game. If there are no rules, there'd be no game. Now, because you have that free will, that choice, it's your responsibility to play the game to the best of your ability and to make sure the other players are not entirely screwed over as well. That's another facet of human thinking. Many individual animals can only think as far as their immediate family or tribe or band. Not even the species, because there are wars that happen between species too. You have your band of hyena here and the rival band that lives 2 kilometers away. You're competing for food, and if you get all the food and they get none and they die out, that doesn't bother you as a hyena. As a human though, it will bother you. It can bother you because we have the ability to think beyond just our genes. We have the ability to defy them. Now, the genes might say we want all the food to propagate our line, but your mind is separate though. It can say, wait a second, should we really do that? Is that ethical? Or would I not be able to sleep at night because I'd be thinking about the tribe that I've killed off by starving them of resources? That's the human dilemma. And if you want actually evidence for this, if you say, wait a second, I don't think, if you're a pure determinist and say, I don't think we can defy our genes like that, it's predetermined. We are the effect that comes from the cause of them. I'll say there are many contradictions with that argument. Every single time that you take a birth control pill or use a condom, you have defied your genes to almost the ultimate extent. In the pure Darwinian sense, in the pure natural selection sense, you're trying to reproduce. That is the goal. That is the success of a gene. The gene wants to propagate. It wants to live forever, so it has to jump from your body, replicate itself, and move on to the next, to a younger generation. And the saga continues. Your genes actually stretch back all the way to the inception of life. Because for you to have been born, you would need a father and a mother. And they would need a father and a mother. And the same is true, going all the way back. That is success for them, to continue the line. You putting on a condom or using birth control, it stops that line from manifesting in that moment. Your genes are probably really angry at you for doing that. They want to move on to the next vessel, but you've stopped it. And the genes are going to worry because to them now there's a risk because you had the opportunity to do that and propagate, but you've delayed it. We don't know what the future holds. What if something bad happens to you in the future that stops that from occurring? The genes would be distressed, but it's not the gene's choice though. It's yours as a human. And there are things like those cultural, societal, economic factors that we take into account. Right there, the perfect example of us defying the genes. We have the power to do that, and we are unique in that respect. You will not see an animal doing that same thing. If given the opportunity to propagate, they will do it, given what their genetic code calls for, because that is success to them. That is how they are programmed. They're something like a robot. The human mind is unique in its ability to break free from that, though. It's a treasure, and we should actually regard it with a certain level of reverence, because we have been the only biological creature to break free from that cycle, to reach a level of thinking where we can apply these filters of morality and abstraction and ethics and whatnot. It is quite crazy. Now, one of the reasons why I say it's crazy is because we take it for granted that our bodies evolved like this, but there is a question there. Why would the genes ever evolve like this? Why would they ever want a human body that can act contrary to the supposed intention of the genome? Why would they do that? Why would they create an organism capable of defying them, of putting on the condom and taking the birth control pills? Why would they want that? How would that even occur? Prior to us even developing the insight, we have to understand we actually did originate from these Darwinian principles as well. Like all other creatures, why did we break free from it? How did we break free from it? Why would the genes allow for that? Was there a certain survival benefit to it? If you take a human robbed of free will, programmed like an animal, pure determinism and instinct, would there be more humans on the planet now versus us with the higher thinking? Now, you could say yes, obviously, because the higher thinking enabled us to do things like technology and hospitals and all this good stuff and food, farming, that makes life easier. But how would the genes have been able to see that? Are they fortune tellers now? All of these things are byproducts after the fact. After you have created this working psyche, and we're talking thousands of years after the fact too, the first light of intelligence that dawned in the human was not producing hospitals and stuff like that. We went many thousands, if not millions of years with very little innovation. And still it survived, and that's even aside from the fact that the genes had to be the ones to decide that. The environment and the genes, the relationship between those two things, the natural selection that resulted in this evolution that we see in the human species. Something to think about there. Now, my closing point is that science alone has a danger to it. It lacks morality, as we've talked about before. Ethics has to be layered onto it. The question of should we build a nuclear bomb is not answerable by science. It's not concerned with it. Science is just there to tell you how something is, what it is, how it came about, the effects of it. Science gives you the fact of the matter. It is detached emotionally as a subject. It's empirical. You need a human mind and an understanding of things like philosophy to determine if something is right. It's a two-way game now. Science in its natural form is very similar to natural selection and nature. It just is. Is it right for that spider to craft this web to catch other living creatures and to trap them there and to eat them? Science cannot answer that question, is it right or wrong? Well, it just is. That's science, it just is. It's the truth, it's the fact of the matter. But as humans, we have to go beyond that. Is it right? The farming we talked about before, is that right? To captivate all these animals and treat them in the worst possible ways, crammed into these small structures and overfed, just for us to produce more meat from them. The science cannot answer that. It tells you how to do it. It tells you the current state. It tells you the effects, maybe positive or negative, but we have to interpret that. It's up to us to figure out, is it right though? The science should be preserved in its integrity for truth telling and fact seeking, but keep in mind it's a two-way street though. And science The debate has to be there beyond simply stating the obvious. In some sense, you can make the point that humans have been tasked with the greatest burden imaginable for existence in this world. There's the easy autopilot way where you're just a creature driven by instinct and geneticism and Darwinism, and you don't have to think about anything. There is no conflict, there is no right or wrong, there just is, in the pure scientific natural way. You do what you have to do to survive, and you don't worry about consequences, you don't think about it. That beaver building his dam, is he destroying the waterway? Is he going to destroy all the trees in the area? It doesn't matter. You just build a dam because that's how you're programmed. That is what you must do to survive as per the genome, the DNA script. It tells you to do this and this and that. Humans don't have the easy way anymore. At one point we did. Evolutionarily, at some point in the line, that was us too. But we broke away and became who we are today. Now we are challenged with things like thinking about what is right or wrong. You have the intention aspect to that. You have to figure out a purpose for yourself, because that's another aspect here too, philosophically. The other billions of organisms on the earth, they have a purpose built into them to propagate the gene. Humans, as I've said, can define success in other ways, actually. That's not our only definition of purpose of success. To the animal, that's it. To the human, though, there is a multitude of possibilities there, and it's not told to you. You can propagate your line and not find fulfillment, and not be happy. Everyone is different in that regard, and the task and the burden is on you to develop your map for the future, to figure out what's right for you as an individual, as a person free from the complete heavy burden of DNA and genetics. You can think freely now. Of course, that's another burden of thinking freely, but it's a blessing too, because it means you can control the future. You can aim your life in a particular direction regardless of what your genes are telling you to do. The influence is there. You are free. What other animal can do that? The answer is none that we know of. Perhaps some alien species, but on Earth, in our solar system, out of all of the billions of organisms that have existed and will exist, humans, the only exception to the rule of Darwinian thinking and natural selection. This is quite breathtaking, and you should be inspired by this. You should take that with the proper stride and the proper motivation to actually build a future worth living in. Now, I think that's enough for today's conversation. I feel my energy slowly dripping away. This was a deep subject matter, and to just get my thoughts straight on this was challenging, of course, like with any difficult subject. To make sure I'm getting everything right and make sure I'm saying the correct things and getting all my thoughts out there. I think we're good for today's conversation. Of course, there's far more to say about Darwinian theories and natural selection and the book The Selfish Gene, but this is where our thoughts brought us today. This discussion about morality and ethics as a human, how humans have perhaps become nature itself, even in the interesting regard of predators. What is the top predator to the human? It's actually other humans now. No other creature kills humans at a rate greater than humans do to themselves. What other creature is like that? Their own top predator is themselves. There isn't too many, if any. Another way in which humans are unique. And the message I want you to take away from this conversation, this talk, is that you're powerful. You're unique as an organism. You've been blessed with the power to do good. No other creature has that luxury, or that burden, depending on how you want to look at it. So take it with stride and think about that. It's very important that we figure this out. So thanks for joining me. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And I think we're actually approaching something like 25,000 listens to the podcast, and I'm very proud of that. Thank you to everyone who has stuck with me and continues to listen. I'm also reachable online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.